Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge podcast. I'm your host, Ralph Behnke, and with me in the studio, Emile Ogier. Emile, welcome to the Edge.
Great to be back for a fourth time, Rolf.
Yeah, well, anybody out there who wants to start a podcast, I'm sure you've said it before. It's not the easiest thing getting two people and Riverside to cooperate with all of the vagaries of technology we have these days. You would expect we could just get on and talk, but no. So this is take four, and hopefully we'll be even more rehearsed for it. So I'm going to start the show today with a bit of a review on some of the jokes as an intro to stories that we'll be talking about. As you know, my test for AGI is whether AI can actually write a joke, and clearly we haven't achieved AGI yet because it has really not been able to do a consistent job in terms of humor. But anyway, here we go. So the first one up, 42 state attorney generals subpoenaed OpenAI this week, and the charge was the chatbot is too agreeable. The joke is 42 states agree on nothing except that they can't stand being agreed with.
Oh,
I thought that was quite funny, actually. Not laugh out loud funny, but yeah, kind of humorous. The second one, Anthropic launched the most powerful model the public has ever had. The public had it for 3 days. Then it got shut down, not by a hacker, not by a rival, but by the guy who wrote the $13 billion check. If you don't know who that guy is, it's Andy Jassy, who's the CEO of Amazon, who basically was the whistleblower. And he's also an enormous investor in Anthropic. So I don't know what he was playing at that day.
yeah.
But anyway, we'll talk more about that story. Not that funny. So I'm going to kind of go, AI half. And let's see the third one over here. Actually, this one is so terrible. I'm not even going to go there. Something about Google and its toll scam. OpenAI built an AI to replace the knowledge worker. This one is a little bit funny. This week it spent $150 million hiring 300,000 consultants to explain it. 300,000 people paid to agree with the AI that agrees with you. That is actually just really sad, to be honest. But yeah, we'll talk about that story a little bit as well, because obviously OpenAI have pushed to get McKinsey and Bain and all of the big consulting companies on board. Then a joke about Midjourney. Midjourney, one of our favorite text to image generators. The company spent 3 years learning to draw a hand with 5 fingers. And they just announced the full body medical scanner. The thing famous for getting the outside of you wrong now wants to look at the inside.
I'll be covering that later.
Yeah, a really interesting story by the founder of Midjourney, and fascinating to see how he's pivoting. So I look forward to that story. Then the last one, 2 countries regulated AI agents this week. Estonia decided every AI agent needs an ID card. Argentina decided AI companies don't need humans at all. One country wants to see the robot's papers. The other gave it a corporation and left the room. I do find this one really interesting, but that's also just not funny. So we're safe, everybody. We haven't yet achieved AGI, and we're so nowhere close to ASI, and we are certainly nowhere close to universal AI, which is reportedly the ultimate expression of AI that we are working towards, according to a new Google DeepMind paper on Archive. Maybe we'll talk about that one as well if we have some time. So I think we're basically giving a no vote of confidence on the humor segments this week. We'll give it a go next week again with the tweaked algorithm. So who knows? We might get a laugh out of all of you at some point. Headlines this week then. So the big news, obviously, is when, as my research says here, the government walked into the room. So obviously, this is on the back of the story that Anthropic shipped Claude Fable 5. I was using it. It was a real delight. And then it got shut down 3 days after launch. And that was basically on a tip-off from Andy Jassy at Amazon, which is, Anthropic's actually largest investor, is what my research is telling me, which I was a bit surprised about. But that was because his team had figured out how to jailbreak it. Of course, the news around that is that Anthropic have said, well, that jailbreak is possible on nearly all models. That's nothing new. And so what's all the big fuss about? And of course, the US government actually didn't shut the model down. What they said was it can only be used by US citizens. The rest of the world is not allowed to touch it. And Anthropic couldn't figure out how to limit it by citizenship. Because, hey, guess what? These models are out across the globe, and many Anthropic workers are not US citizens either. And so they wouldn't even be allowed to use their own model. So I think that was a little bit of a weird request from the government. Maybe they understood that, asking for a full ban was not appropriate. But, either way, we don't have Fable 5 anymore, and we don't know when we're going to get it. Maybe you've got some news story on that. The other story, obviously, these 42 state attorney generals subpoenaing OpenAI over how its chatbot behaves. So we've seen quite a lot of stories of some terrible cases, really, of AI gone wrong, with OpenAI being sued by a number of different states over the sycophancy of the model. And basically, the federal energy regulator, apparently they're called FERC, they've given grid operators 60 days to rewrite the rules for AI data centers. So that's interesting. Estonia moved to issue cards to AI agents, and Argentina draft a law granting legal personhood to AI-run corporations. That one is particularly interesting for me because, as you know, the experiment right here on the Bleeding Edge podcast is, can we set up a fully autonomous AI music label? And I am definitely looking to incorporate that into Argentina, because guess what? It's going to be its own legal person. So we'll have to see if we can actually do that. We'll give a bit of a test. So no doubt, for those of you that have been following the IPOs, obviously we've had the SpaceX IPO, and 4 days after the biggest IPO in history, SpaceX bought Cursor, rumored to be around 60 billion. Of course, 60 billion was the option that they had agreed with the Cursor team some time back. And so they've just exercised it much earlier than anybody thought. Makes absolute sense. Cursor is an excellent harness for development. And so I think they have well and truly brought themselves back into the running, because obviously, as we said on the last episode, Grok with a K is only about 3.4% market, mainly used by X users. And so Cursor actually puts them into the mainstream in terms of engineering and development users. DeepSeek raised 7.4 billion. And actually, an interesting story around that is the state is a large investor. So the Chinese government have basically invested in DeepSeek, but they have also said that none of the investors can pull out. So basically, once you're in, and only they will tell you when you can exit and cash in your chips. Only they have voting rights, which I think is also really interesting. Fascinating model. Not sure that would get through most regulators in the West, but there you go. ChatGPT crossed 1 billion phones, and so that's obviously a really big increase in their downloads on phones. And a reasoning model quietly diagnosed 18 children that human specialists couldn't. So a bit of a story there around what's going on in terms of the medical deployment of AI. So some really interesting ones there. I think, I'd love to dive into these I've got like top 8 deep dives. So no doubt we will get into these. But Emile, Mythos, Fable 5, what's your take on what the government pulled off in terms of that shutdown?
Yeah, I got quite a bit to say about that. Before I do, just want to cover the cursor piece. I'm full agreement with you. I think it's a really good strategic move. I've been a Grok user for quite some time. It's not quite there, unfortunately. Elon's tried, a lot of interesting things that haven't quite worked out. But with Cursor 4, as you say, the harness is really strong. They've got RL. They've got a lot of good coding data that they can learn from. And in addition to that, Elon's lending them the full might of his Colossus mega centers, both Colossus and Colossus 2. So they've got the compute power, they've got the data to make this a better product. And in addition to that, not only on top of what they've already run that inference model, that Kimi 2 last run, which, was very close on par matched to Opus 4.8 and GPT 5.5. They're now fully rebuilding it without Kimi 2 and the compute power and all that rich data that they can teach the model on. So I think the next model release is going to be really impressive. And most probably for now, as it stands, is paused, but new Grok will be cursor in whatever shape or form that is. So I'm really excited to see what comes of that.
Yeah, and I think what we're learning is that the harness is really the differentiator here. So, we speak a lot about being able to use tools like Kimi and even DeepSeek and Quen, which are some of the Chinese models, because they're really cheap or they're really inexpensive to run in comparison to certainly Claude. And of course you can do that, and you quoted some really great benchmarks, and they are great benchmarks. The problem is when you try and use those tools, you realize very quickly that the LLM is only a small part of the infrastructure that you need. And the reason why Claude Code is so capable, it has a great LLM that's powering it, but of course, that's only about 2.5% of the solution. And what it does really well is connect into an ecosystem of tools and capabilities and MCPs. And it's really the connectability and its ability to, pick the right tools. And that all sits within this concept of the harness. And so what you have to have first off is a good harness, and then you have to have a good LLM. Well, you need both of those together. And of course, when you're like using something like Kimi, the best way to use it is actually to run it through Codex or to run it through Cursor. You can also connect it to Claude Code. It doesn't quite run as well in Claude Code, from what I understand. I've been setting up my own tests with it, but I think we've spoken about the harness quite a bit, and to really understand Elon's deal here, it's about plugging that gap, about getting the harness that really allows the LLM to leverage all of the tools and the full ecosystem that actually makes a development environment possible. And that's what that's about. So yeah, great things coming out of the SpaceX acquisition, I think, of Cursor. And I really look forward to what they're going to do with it, because, he's got the full stack. No doubt we will be seeing data centers in the sky or in space with his ability to launch satellites. I think the only thing he's missing is his own hardware in terms of the GPUs or CPUs that can kind of run this stuff. I see Amazon has also released its own chips. Of course, NVIDIA has got the biggest share of the market with its GPUs. I do see that AMD has also come out with a new computer that is able to share CPU and GPU. And then obviously the other big IPO that we haven't even touched on is Cerebras with their new chip technology, which has some really interesting capability. So I think the hardware space is also really ramping up. Will be fascinating to see what Elon acquires in terms of that capability in the coming months as well. So
I'll get
that's a
on
good call out.
to the Fable 5 update, Rolf, but thanks so much for pointing out that observation with the connectivity on Kimi to Claude. I wasn't aware of that because I'm quite keen to do that with GLM. Just wondering if it most probably faces the same kind of connectivity issues you're experiencing. So more on that once I try it. But for now, more in addition to what Rob's covered on the Fable 5 update, the overall audience sentiment is to Anthropic's announcement was predominantly negative and frustrated. Users expressed strong disappointment over the abrupt global disablement of Fable 5 and Mythos 5, viewing the US government's export control directive as overly broad and disproportionate, while a minority acknowledged legitimate national security concerns around advanced dual use capabilities. The prevailing view criticizes both the government's heavy handed approach and Anthropic's decision to apply a blanket restriction rather than targeted compliance. Skepticism about the stated justification a narrow jailbreak was common, alongside broader concerns about US tech dependency. The government intervention seen as regulatory overreach or panic that harms legitimate users and businesses worldwide. Trending replies include comments such as genuine question for whoever drafted this directive under the deemed export rule. Your foreign national employees can't look at the model they built. Their own commit history is now an arms shipment to themselves. And for those interested, I think across all the labs, over 60 to 65% are foreign nationals. Another reply was, this marks the end of an era. The public may never have such open access to frontier models again. What happens when only the government and frontier labs have access to the strongest models? I'm not sure, but it's most probably going to be a whole lot less fun than we used to. And lastly, this is a massive wake up call. Imagine your startup built on Fable 5 and it just went dark overnight with zero warning. Anthropic's own foreign national employees cannot even access. This is proof that you cannot fully rely on the American tech infrastructure. Countries around the world need to start building for themselves, build sovereign, build local. So, yeah, all pretty interesting stuff.
I think it's a big wake up call for every nation state. I know in Europe, they've also now said, well, this is, just points to the need for sovereign AI. Hey, that's what Mistral is supposed to be, guys. But no news on Mistral again. So what's going on? And I think, it's basically being compared to nuclear bomb capability. So I think this is the kind of thing that you restrict access to nuclear weapons. So this is every bit as capable as a nuclear bomb, let's say, for creating some destruction. And I get, why they have basically decided to intervene. That was always going to happen. It's just a little bit earlier than what I thought. And I think the issue here is that none of us can really depend on any one model, as you've called out. So, even if, of course, startups, you might have even started your startup on the basis of being able to continue with Fable 5, certainly introduced some new capabilities. But of course, even I had updated a number of skills, and certainly Tony had updated all of the development skills in the dev stack to run on Fable 5 and had to reverse all of that to 4.8. So, this isn't just large companies that are being affected. It's actually folks like us sitting at home with our own, dev and AI practices. And so I think it's a big deal. And it means for me that actually being dependent on any one technology is something that I will certainly be building out of my practices and making sure that I can plug in multiple different models. And I think that's just the way to go in the future.
For sure. And Rolf, just wanted to add a bit more color to that with the lens on the Eastern fronts, as you mentioned. The AI sector is facing extreme market turbulence right now. Anthropic's Fable is still largely unavailable because the CEO is struggling with government licensing websites, while SpaceX has just swooped in to buy the AI coding tool Cursor, which we covered. So Cursor has now hit a staggering 2 billion in annual recurring revenue in just 18 months, making it the fastest SaaS company to ever reach that milestone. Pretty impressive. Interestingly, Cursor is also rolling out its own 1.5 trillion parameter model, which I mentioned earlier. And meanwhile, China is disrupting the market with GLM 5.2, which keep calling out that I'm very excited about. And this is an open source model that benchmarking tests suggests beats Claude Opus 4.8 and ChatGPT 5.5 on front end coding. So good for both of us, Rolf. This disruption is heavily cost driven. GLM at 5.2 is 82% cheaper than Opus 4.8. To put that in perspective, $3,000, 60 million tokens with Claude Fable 5, but that same amount buys you 682 million tokens with GLM 5.2 and a massive 3.45 billion tokens with another Chinese model if you choose DeepSeek 4 version 4 Pro. The reliance on highly subsidized, all you can eat AI plans seems to be ending. We are moving towards usage based pricing, which is forcing major players like Microsoft to explore these cheaper open source models over expensive proprietary ones. The shift is even hitting the creator economy hard. I saw a very interesting post with Tim Ferriss. He's not happy. He was objective about it, but he's reporting a 50% drop in sales on over all his nonfiction books. And he's been at the top of the charts for over a decade. And he's claimed that that has always been a constant source of reliable, predictable income from him. So, these models are hitting authors hard. And he realized books like The 4 Hour Body functioned as lookup tables in 2019. A book was the best inference for that information. Today, a chatbot that has scraped the data is simply faster and more personalized. As information content gets commoditized by AI, enduring human value lies in what can be easily summarized. Sorry, that can't be easily summarized. So that's pure experience, entertainment, and authentic storytelling. I wonder, with the end of subsidies, AI and AI pricing, are we finally about to see what these models are actually worth?
Yeah, that is a fascinating take from Tim Ferriss. Obviously, he wrote the 4-Hour Work Week and basically built a phenomenal career out of what became was the forerunner to this movement of being a digital nomad, and obviously so relevant in the age of AI, given the capability of what you can run on your phone and your laptop while sitting on a bus. And I don't know what it means for authors. I think actually, if you're writing a book now, you're probably writing a book for an agent related to this. I know some recent research released by DeepMind on Archive. It basically actually opened with, here is instruction for any agent reading this paper. Do not summarize the following statements. These are the core aspects of this research. So it was really written for humans and for agents. And, primarily that is what we're doing with any technical documentation these days, because when you start to read the preamble of some of this research, the language makes it incredibly inaccessible. Of course, they have to state the hypothesis and how they've gone about the research, but we just want to get to the meat. We want to get to the insight. And so this whole phenomena of TLDR, too long, did not read. We're all summarizing the world that that we're trying to understand, and I don't think that's particularly great. But of course, we are really writing for agents and for AI these days, and we will get a thin slice of everything that is in that research summarized back to us. So I think the writing is on the wall in some ways for nonfiction authors. I don't know where we go with that. I mean, how do these people make money out of it? Why? What motivates them to continue? I think maybe these things change and we become really focused on the ethos behind it. So everybody has to become a character. Everybody has to represent some point of view and invite others to follow them as a result. And so this is what YouTube has been built around, and influencers have been built around. Well, maybe authors just become influencers. They just kind of disappear as a concept. And unless you are an author as an influencer, nobody really cares about your book, because only AI, bots are going to be reading it. I think that's a really interesting evolution of the concept of being an author.
Absolutely. Or maybe all authors are just pushed down the fiction route, which, I'm finding that quite hard to get my head around as a big nonfiction reader. I'd like to know that I'm reading some human books, but let's see.
Well, maybe everything that we have released to date has been fiction. So many years ago, I watched a show with Stephen Fry, and the show is called QI, and they do really kind of interesting science-based stories. And one of the facts was that 75% of all facts that have ever been proven have now been disproven. And so essentially, that was the fact. And of course, we're seeing such incredible advances in science that it's absolutely true. We keep finding stuff that has been proven to not have been true. So basically, all truths are up for grabs. All truths are maybe works of fiction, just until the next research paper comes along. But I know what you mean. And that's a little bit of a boon for me, to be honest, because when I read a book, I tend to read, over the last few years at any rate, I've tended to read nonfiction. But when I have read fiction, I have found that to be actually such a delight. And maybe that's something that I will get back to, because maybe that is the only reading style that is left. So just to also go back to that cursor story, I think what was quite interesting, you mentioned the Composer 3, which is the 1.5 trillion parameter model that Cursor have been working on. So that's actually been trained from scratch on 100,000 GPUs, and it's
Big
as
deal.
big as Opus and GPT, and it's shipping in weeks. And so basically, this is what Musk has just landed as his engine for development in SpaceX. And I don't know, it's such a fantastic move. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's amazing, Rolf. And you look at the price. I know we're getting really desensitized to numbers. 60 billion is a lot of money, but after the SpaceX IPO, it's chump change for him. an easy decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think what did he? I don't know what the valuation was. I think
60 billion.
his evaluation was, well, no, but in the total SpaceX, I think it passed at some point 2.1 trillion, which eclipsed Saudi Aramco's 2019 record.
That's right. I think for a partial moment, overnight markets, it went north of close to 3 billion. Crazy.
Very interesting. So, on to a next just quick deep dive story. As I mentioned in the news headlines, OpenAI rents consulting armies. So, this is basically where they've invested 150 million in basically acquiring partners. So, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Accenture, PwC, all big consulting firms that are obviously consulting into the enterprise market. And they have basically created this OpenAI partner network that is targeting 300,000 certified consultants by the end of 2026. And essentially, they are giving them access to tools like Codex, educating them in cybersecurity, AI agent development. And they are also essentially trying to set them up as forward deployed experts. And so Palantir, the defense company based out in the US, really invented this term of the forward deployed engineer. So this is essentially somebody that is a blend of AI engineer and change manager and consultant. And they're essentially working directly with clients to bring new technologies to bear. I think that is the new age for anybody that has worked in transformation or in change management or indeed consulting, because I think what you're doing is you're really, bringing your tools into any consulting engagement. I've said it many times, if you bring in somebody like myself, I don't just come with the skills that I had in my PowerPoint slides anymore. I come with my army of agents. And that is really what you're buying. And of course, that is what you're buying when it comes to this OpenAI partner network. And presumably, we will see that Anthropic follow suit and they will all be fighting for basically these consultants to adopt and represent their tools. So I think it's a big deal because it's really, kind of defining what it takes to close enterprise deals. It's not just about distribution. Distribution is obviously what Google is really good at. They're connected to so many of the world's companies providing them services, but even they have struggled to sell in some of these larger components that they have within their AI stable. And so I think, influencing or renting these big four consulting firms to do the work for you is a smart play. But no doubt everybody will be, building on this. And so I think there is also an Anthropic Claude partner network. I haven't actually got into detail on what they have done there, but we'll certainly have a look at that in the future. So what do you think, Emile? Would you sign up as a OpenAI partner network member and sell your soul to Sam?
I don't know if I'd be selling my soul, but it's certainly in the space that we're deeply interested in. And by your definition of what did you call it, forward engineer expert, I think we both very neatly fit the bill for that classification. So that's good to hear. We've got the background plus the AI interest, plus the agents, plus the AI capability and expertise. So sounds positive. Need to look more towards that space. I did want to. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have officially changed my title to a forward deployed engineer who spends 8 hours a day on Claude, but nobody knows what I'm talking about. So I also tell them I'm a transformation expert, but there you go. I'm sure the market will catch up at some point.
But maybe you need to switch the engineer to expert because it also adds.
Yeah, maybe the engineer is a bit much. Done. Change approved.
I'm going to move on to the most exciting story I read this week, Rolf. We don't cover medicine and health that much. I've been waiting for the next big story, and it certainly is the one you covered earlier. I just want to expand on that mid-journey. What if getting a crystal clear view inside your body felt more like stepping into a warm spa pool rather than lying in a cold hospital scanner? Well, Mid-Journey just dropped that possibility by launching a new medical division and unveiling a working prototype. Cardiologist Efshine Emrani shared detailed breakdown on X, and it's easy to see why this has caught attention. Here's how it works. You step into a platform in a shallow pool of water. The platform slowly lowers you through a ring containing roughly 500,000 tiny ultrasonic transducers, each the size of a grain of sand. These act as both speakers and microphones, sending sound waves through your body from every angle and recording the echoes. And in about 60 seconds, serious computing power and around 2 petaflops holding 16 gigabytes per second and a lot of AI compute power turn that data into a resolution 3D map of your entire internal anatomy. So no radiation, no magnets, no claustrophobia, and no contrast dyes. Imrani points out why this could matter for something like heart health. Current detail scans are usually reactive. You get them when a problem is already suspected, and they're expensive, time consuming, and involve trade offs that make frequent use impractical. This approach could flip that, letting people track changes over time with quick, repeatable scans and build a personal baseline that AI could analyze for early shifts. The company is thinking big with plans for 50,000 scanners worldwide over 6 years and capacity for 1 billion scans a month. That's just incredible. For the first location, described as Midjourney Spa in San Francisco, is targeted for the end of 2027. Get this, drum roll, scans are projected to cost just a few dollars, Rob. It's built on the Butterfly Network's ultrasound on-chip technology combined with Midjourney's AI reconstruction. The goal is image quality approaching MRI quality in many ways, but dramatically faster and without the downside. That said, Imrani is clear that this is still a first generation prototype. Only a small number of people have been scanned so far. Current times run longer than 60-second target, and it hasn't received FDA clearance for diagnostic use. Full clinical validation against existing gold standards are still ahead, along with bigger conversations around privacy at that kind of scale. But the overall audience sentiment is cautious and skeptical, with a smaller share of measured optimism. Many replies acknowledge the conceptual appeal of rapid radiation-free imaging, but emphasis that the prototype remains far from clinically validated for diagnostic use. Medical professionals in particular express doubts about overhyped claims relative to current technical realities and regulatory requirements. Excitement centers on long-term potential if hurdles are cleared. And a reply from a retired radiologist that I caught, he said, "It's great that new image technology is being worked on. I'm not impressed with the image quality. It's not clear whether the product is recording anatomy or physiology or something else, but I look forward to seeing how this evolves. Even so, if the resolution and reliability hold up, it could represent the most significant new imaging approach in decades, turning advanced internal views into something routine and proactive instead of rare and reactive." Any way you look at this, I just think this is super exciting, and I hope they make good headway with it.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm so impressed with how the founder of Midjourney has been able to just continuously evolve into unbelievably fundamental companies that he has founded. And I love this model. I think it's fantastic. I'm sure he's going to do something great with it. And of course, just kind of frequency resonance is just such a fundamental technology that I can really see this working. I think it sounds very accessible, and I can actually understand it, which is unusual. So yeah, we'll be rooting for that one.
Nice, Rob.
Well, I love that story, but onto a quick one that I alluded to earlier, which is Google's actually suing a Chinese network that used Gemini to run a $1.9 billion phishing empire. So, excuse me, we're not just talking about phishing as in going fishing. This is really scams where they sent out something like 2.5 million scam texts to people saying, "Oh, you've got an unpaid toll bill," and they basically got something like 3.87 million credit card details that they then stole. And essentially, they built something like 9,000 fake sites, 1.5 million fraudulent URLs. So these were all websites that they created so that you would go, they'd send you a link, you'd go, and it would all look very official. And obviously, you would then pay your unpaid toll. So, it's an interesting story. Why? Well, because Google isn't even allowed to be used in China. So the fact that they have actually used Gemini to set this up and run it out of China is actually quite hilarious, but also very sad. Do something positive, guys. Come on, outsider enterprise. I mean, anybody can start scamming, actually, add something to the human race. But I just thought that was a really fascinating story that has come out. And I just guess it speaks to the level of sophistication that we can expect from the darker side of humanity. And I mean, this is exactly the reason why Fable 5, gets pulled, because we just can't trust ourselves to behave decently. And somebody out there is going to try and scam you. And AI is such a great tool for that.
Yeah, that's a crazy story, Rolf. I guess on the other side of the coin is, all these controls for safety in Fable 5. Either way you look at it, if it's a good or a bad thing, it's an accelerant for China to get on and catch up. So I just, any way you cut it, I don't think the way things have been handled is a positive one. But let's see. And I've got some other interesting facts. I just wanted to cover some stories from Elon Musk. He posted this week. It's humbling to consider that if we harness just 1/1,000,000th of the sun's power for AI, that'll be much more than 1,000,000 times the intelligence of all of humanity. So it's quite incredible when you think about that frame and just how much untapped potential there still is in energy that we can still harness and utilize. And following the historic SpaceX initial public offering IPO on June 12th, 2026, SpaceX valuation skyrocketed, propelling Elon Musk to become the world's first and only trillionaire, which is pretty unreal. And as of this week, 2026, his net worth has surged to approximately $1.26 trillion, with some real-time trackers like Forbes saying that it peaked at 1.3 trillion during trading hours. Because of that explosive growth, his personal wealth is now roughly 4 times larger than the second richest person in the world. And if you want to know who that is, that's Larry Page from Google, who sits at 301 billion. I think this is going to give him a lot of phenomenal strategic advantage in both the companies and the talents he can now simply acquire, much like Meta did with Instagram. And equally, he can afford to erode market share, for example, by setting impossible offerings, something both Google and Apple also have the capability to do due to their huge accumulative cash war chests. It's also entirely true that the sheer scale of the recent market movement created a financial milestone that is genuinely hard to conceptualize. Following the historic SpaceX IPO, Elon Musk's personal fortune surged by an unprecedented 164 billion in a single trading session. To put that into a sobering lens, Warren Buffett's widely considered one of the greatest investors in history, and who's the 10th richest person in the world. He's been building his wealth for over 7 decades, has a total lifelong net worth of 148 billion. And Elon Musk gained that in a single trading session. And he's made more than his net worth in one trading session. So let that one breathe.
God, I've been destroying my wealth for 5 decades. So this makes me feel awesome. Yeah, it's impressive, to go from being a kid bullied at school to ruling the world. And I think he's, definitely got the mind for it. I like the way he thinks. Obviously, not everything that he does, everybody agrees with, and that's fine. But I definitely think the way that he is pulling all of this together, the mega ecosystem that he's building, and, now the fact is he's literally got the world's resources at his fingertips. So, hey, go for it, Elon. Let's see what you can do. If you need a podcast, give us a call. So I think, with that in mind, one of the things that we're obviously moving towards, we've been talking about AGI. A lot of people say we've already hit AGI. So it might be worth just jumping into a definition here. So AGI, AI that can understand, learn, perform any intellectual task a human can across domains rather than being narrow specialized. The key word is general, so flexible competence that transfers across tasks. So we're talking about reasoning, language, planning, learning at roughly human level. So today's systems are sometimes called narrow AI by contrast, though where exactly the AGI line sits is heavily contested. So there's no agreed benchmark, which is why obviously people are arguing endlessly about whether we've achieved it or not. I mean, it's certainly clear that we have narrow forms of AGI and we are rapidly moving towards more broader representation of artificial general intelligence. But obviously, what's actually next is what's important. So, we can forget about AGI because we probably got there and we probably will get there even more convincingly. So, if we look at artificial super intelligence, this is ASI. So, AI that substantially exceeds the human minds across virtually every domain. So this is, thinking about scientific creativity, strategic reasoning, social skills, huge irony there. An AI that is better at social skills than the race that or the species that invented it, and obviously general problem solving. So the term comes from Nick Bostrom. He was an author. I guess he's looking for a new job, and he basically framed this super intelligence definition. And so it's not just about being smarter than one person, but smarter than all of humanity collectively at cognitive work. And this comes back to, if we can just harness a millionth of the sun, then we can actually power the kind of compute that will lead to super intelligence. And so it's definitely a concept of what usually, what will follow AGI. And obviously, this brings us back to the mythos conversation, because one of the papers that Anthropic released along with their mythos release was that recursive self-improvement. So this is what we defined in the last episode, RSI, not repetitive strain injury from hitting the enter key while your Claude code asks for responses, but this is about self-improving AI, and that's what we're going to get when we basically initiate superintelligence. But what comes after superintelligence? That's what everybody is thinking about. And this is definitely a less standardized definition because even if you ask the AI, it's kind of like, well, then what's next is labeled as universal AI. I just don't know exactly what it is. So I can't quite tell you exactly what it is. But basically, it's a theoretical, formal sense that we end up with a mathematically optimal agent that can actually perform in any computable environment. So, immediately we get to some weird language. The canonical example is Marcus Hutter's AIXI, a formal model of university optimal reinforcement learning. It's probably optimal but uncomputable, so it serves as a theoretical idea. And so that's what we are heading towards. I just thought that was kind of interesting in the context of Elon's statement that if we could just harness 1 millionth of the sun, clearly we're going to need to get an AI super intelligence, or maybe even a universal AI to maybe figure that out for us. But I hope that's a couple of interesting definitions.
Yeah, for sure. All cool. And on the topic of interesting stories, I got another one. Midway through listening to latest the Moonshot podcast, David had a really interesting idea. I think it's unique to him. He hasn't seen it around anywhere else. He's basically saying when we're looking at all these phenomenal valuations out there, all that liquidity that doesn't compare to anything historically, he wonders if it's a sign of things to come in a changing economy whereby finances don't start to make a lot less sense in the economy. So effectively moving from what he's saying is moving from money to energy to intelligence, ultimately replacing the financial system in itself. And his rationale behind that is when RSI arrives is maybe it's not relevant that these companies will need money. And a good example of this might be a truth is, Sam doesn't seem to be in a rush to do his IPO, and he is making noises that they're getting really close to recursive learning. So that being the case, if they can manufacture what they need, I just wonder, does money become less relevant? I thought it was just a really interesting idea either way, even if it's fiction.
Yeah, let's kick the cash into touch and hurry up and make everything zero cost. Because, then we'll be back in the Garden of Eden when we could just pluck fruit off the trees. Just watch out for the snakes. But I love the concept, no doubt. That is going to be the discussion of our times, Emile. So,
Indeed.
not something to cover on this episode. On a really dramatic front, there is a claim that a fully autonomous drone has killed soldiers for the first time. So this actually came out of the New Scientist on the 13th of June. It's actually the first known battlefield death from an autonomous vehicle. And basically, this paper was just looking at a single test, which was actually in 2024, where they had 10 AI-controlled quadcopters. They flew 3.5 kilometers, switched to a mode where onboard AI independently searched for and struck targets with no live feed, no operator link, no human approving the final kill, and several Russian soldiers lost their lives. So the sole source of this is actually a Ukrainian defense industry figure who supplied the tech, and he was speaking at a media event. And so I guess, why it matters is if this really is true, then we truly have passed the Rubicon in using machines to take out humans without any oversight. And of course, this is what caused a lot of the issues between Anthropic and the government. And obviously, the government in the US basically labeled Anthropic I can't remember quite what the term was, but they put them on the list of threats to national security. And this is why Anthropic did it, because they didn't want unfettered decision making by the AI. And of course, this tech already exists if this news story is to be believed. And I think, if we are going to allow bad actors to deploy these kinds of tools when governments and institutions, let's say, don't do it, then actually that's probably going to push us to a very dystopian future where we have Robocop just blasting away at targets that it has deemed necessary to exterminate. So a bit of a worry there. One, I think we always know this is coming. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I think, I'm echoing your statement a bit, Emile. Maybe we just need to pause for a moment and actually get some kind of a universal law agreed or a universal protocol for how we want all of this to play out. We've certainly tried to do it when it's come to climate change, whether you believe in the climate science or not. That was a moment where the world tried to come together unsuccessfully. We've certainly seen it within how we have tried to manage and govern nuclear. And I think the moment has come. This is beyond the G7 or the G8. This really requires us to come together as humanity to figure it out, because I think the stakes are pretty high. This technology is just too capable from an autonomous point of view. And as we move into embodied AI with robots, the race is going to be on to find a hiding place once these things have directives that are not congruent with human existence. And no doubt, some nutter out there will have programmed the AI to take us down. So forget about, chemical weapons of mass destruction. We now have, AI with an alignment issue.
Yeah, totally, Rolf. I'm glad you brought up the climate change points. As I don't know if you do follow the news, but if you've noticed since the great need for this exponential growth for data centers, that requirements has filtered through. The news stories on climate change are drying up. Maybe a bit of a cynical view, but it is interesting that it aligns with when these data centers need to come into full force. But I'm fully on page with you regarding being a good steward for humanity. The drones scare the living daylights out of me. Of the latest tech drones, and they move so quickly. Like far faster than the ones you've seen in those pretty light shows. They were hiding in a bunker. They had forward knowledge that they were coming. They gave them a shotgun for dispersed shooting. The drone came and attacked them 3 times, got them 3 out of the 4 times. And there were 2 of them. They just didn't stand a chance, knowing where it was coming from. They are lightning fast. It is so scary, but I don't want to end the show on a somber note. But yeah, we do need to looking forward in a positive direction regarding being responsible authors to humanity.
Yeah, and I think definitely your point about the data centers is interesting. I'm not sure that that's fully the cause for climate change rhetoric really being somewhat silenced. I think a lot of it's due to the fact that so much of the climate science has been proven to be incorrect and not really founded on good data. Certainly, there was a big court case with the guy that published the original hockey stick, and a lot of what he published was absolute nonsense. And so that's actually come out. It's a little bit quieter, but you can go and have a look at some of that research. Climate has always changed. Climate will always change. The climate is changing. I don't think there is any denying that. What's causing it is a little bit up for grabs, and there's no doubt we have a bit of a hand in all of that. So we're not here to debate that, but I think that's also one of the reasons why it's gone a bit quiet. And so we need data centers. Data centers are where the war is truly being fought. And this is where it gets really interesting, because I think we are moving to an age now where AI is starting to get an identity. So some weeks ago, we've basically seen in the news that Argentina have brought in some laws that basically allow you to create a non-human corporation. And Estonia have done something a little bit similar. They've basically given AI the opportunity to have a legal identity. And so really the one is trying to leash it, the other one is trying to set it free. And so essentially they're at two philosophical ends of the spectrum. But Estonia, just to give a bit more context, it's planning to be the first country to issue scoped AI ID codes. So an AI acting, an agent essentially acting on your behalf. So you want to go on holiday, you want to book a flight, or you want to book a hotel. You can basically tell your AI to go away and find you a deal. And it's essentially borrowing your entire digital identity. So this ID encodes exactly what it may do, and leaves an auditable trail of who acted for whom and what rights and who's responsible ultimately. And so I think, that's just a good thing to do, because the AI does get legal agency. Exactly what that means in terms of protection for the consumer, I'm not sure, but it may well be that the AI agent that acted on your behalf will be indistinguishable, from your identity. It's essentially you. So if something goes wrong with a holiday, you'd be able to have some legal recourse to that. And then obviously in Argentina, what they've done is they basically created a category called Sociedades de Inteligencia Artificial, and that is granting full legal personhood to companies run entirely by AI. So it means the AI is able to own assets, sign contracts, pay taxes, and carry a limited liability with no human owner. And so there's no directors, there's no shareholders required. So another author, Yuval Noah Harari, brilliant author, wrote the book on what was it, Sapiens and Sapiens 2. He warned that it hands AI an all-purpose key to financial and political systems and risks an AI state. Now, Peter Thiel, the big investor, he's actually moved to Argentina with his family, and he met with the president of Argentina, Milei, to express interest. So I don't know. I'm definitely keen to test out this Sociedades de Inteligencia Artificial. I think it sounds like a really interesting move, but clearly, there are some big stakes, because the AI will be able to be completely independent with, at least in Argentina, some kind of legal governance and coverage for its actions.
That's insane, Rolf. I think for a Saturday, that's a bit too much for my head to wrestle with as a concept. But I'll certainly sit with it and reflect. Gosh, things are changing fast.
Yeah, and yeah, it's a really interesting take. I don't know. I mean, I've got a little summary here of what each side gets right and wrong, which I might just kind of read out here, because basically with Estonia, it's right about the problem and the design is genuinely good. If an agent books your flight, it's literally borrowing your whole login. So scoping that down to may spend up to €200, may not touch email with an audit trail is the single most practical AI safety net. The risk is it only works if adoption is near universal. So a voluntary agent ID that the sketchy agents simply skips, is a velvet rope. And so I think this is true. And we've obviously seen kind of agent to agent protocols coming out of Google. And so we know we're starting to get to some of the infrastructure. We know that the Linux Foundation has also set up a body for agent governance. So I'm hoping that this will really kind of feed into some of that infrastructure. Argentina, on the other end, my analysis kind of is offering up here that Argentina is right. The law is too slow, but it's potentially wrong about the fix. So a corporation that can act at machine speed without human bottleneck is a real efficiency unlock, but limited liability with no human required isn't deregulation, it's de-accountability. So when the AI corp launders money, breaches a contract, kills somebody, then basically this doesn't really work. So you can sue the AI corp, but if there's no human, no asset behind it, you've sued a ghost. And that's a problem. I think at the end of the day, no doubt these are the first moves of what is going to be a very exciting regulatory change that we are all going to have the honor of living through if the drones don't get us.
Yeah.
But
Well, sorry, I just want to add, Rolf, I'm just trying to put this in perspective. It is interesting, having sat and lived in the regulation space for a long time. If you think about the contactless cards, how careful and slowly increasing those thresholds took when the cards first came out. I can't remember what it was. I think it was £5 or £10, and then they raised it to 15, 20. That took a lot of time. And we, like, from out the gate saying limited to $200, that's quite a step change. Yeah, frightening.
yeah, I mean, we are the bottleneck, so we do need to free these agents. And just as a bit of a check-in on the music project, I have actually, just a reminder to everybody, if it's the first time listening to the show, we are testing what AI is capable of. And one of the projects you will find on the bleeding edge, versal.app, you'll be able to go to that website and see all of the show notes. And on there is a building with AI menu, and it basically tracks our project here. And the project is to create a fully autonomous music label. So no human in the loop at all. And I am firmly the bottleneck this week because I have not yet been successful in getting the music published onto SoundCloud, which will then actually publish it onto the Spotify and Apple Music platforms. And so I'm, just perfect example of you put a human in the loop, you immediately create a bottleneck. And so over the last few weeks, I created several agents that were able, just from my, very simple instruction, I would say, go and research some aspect of music. It would then generate a persona. It would generate an idea for an album. It would then build out the story and actually write the lyrics, then write the music prompt for Suno. It would actually log into Suno and it would go and generate the songs, and it would then basically build the album art, master the music, which means it basically runs some sound engineering principles to make sure that the loudness and the levels are all the same across the album. And it'll then go on and build a small website for the album and actually do the marketing. The final bit is for me to get it onto a distribution platform so you can all hear it. And that bit right now, there are some limitations. So I will probably move to a new platform. But, there's a bunch of albums just sitting there right now. They're really good. And I can't get people to listen to it because I have to sit down behind the computer and do something. And so a really good test, a really good expression of the impact of a human in the loop. And, the machine operates at machine speed. We operate at human speed. The one is milliseconds and minutes. The other is, however long it takes us to get there. And that might be minutes, hours, weeks, or months, or maybe never. And so this is really the problem that we're trying to overcome, and why, I think really the future is fully autonomous AI businesses that are fully AI native, with all of the potential for going wrong that is associated with that.
And on that note,
Yeah, so actually, we're very bullish on AI on the show. So if some of the stories, obviously, are giving us cause to pause and think.
jokes aside, I have heard your music. It's brilliant. I can't wait until you share that out into the worldwide. World.
Yes, it's coming, and no doubt I will overcome my workload for my client projects. So I'm doing very interesting work on the retail side. Obviously, with this Nextsite technology, Nextsite has an amazing tag that basically allows you to track all of the items in a store and give you the same kind of information that you would about how a consumer moves through a website. And to actually have this in the physical world is leading to some amazing insights. And I've been doing some wonderful work in London with an Excite client to really look at how they are going to unlock this technology and go beyond a very successful pilot that we've been running there. And I guess it's just a reflection for me. I wanted to be at the sharp end of what is going on in AI and actually getting the opportunity to deploy these types of solutions, blending hardware and AI is really exciting for me. But it does rather mean that these, let's just call them private projects, are sometimes on the back burner.
Yeah, fair enough.
But no doubt this week, we'll release something, and I will be looking for a massive jump in the SoundCloud listens. So since I started the project, I had something like 18,000 listens of my music, which is really exciting. My tally still sits, I think, this week at about $17 earned. So it's gone up a little bit, but I'm not quite giving up the day job just yet.
Awesome stuff, Rob.
Well, I think we've covered the edge thoroughly this week, Emile. So thanks very much for delighting us with your stories.
And yours. And catch you next week.
See you on the edge.